Hey there, travelers. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from. Now let's begin our journey into the unknown. I'm going to tell you something that's been eating me alive for the past 3 months. Something that cost me my entire team and left me with questions that keep me awake every night. The brass classified everything, buried it under so many black ink redactions that even I don't know the whole truth anymore. But I need to get this out. I need someone to know what really happened in that frozen hell. My name is Staff Sergeant Devin Redford, and I led a 4-man extraction team into the deepest parts of Siberian wilderness last December. Our mission seemed straightforward enough. Extract Agent Fred Reddick, one of our deep cover operatives who'd been captured 3 weeks prior during a reconnaissance operation near the Russian border. Standard prisoner extraction. Get in, get our guy, get out. I'd done dozens of these operations before. Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, you name it, I'd pulled assets out of worse places. But this one felt different from the moment we got our briefing. The location coordinates led to a facility that didn't officially exist on any map. No satellite imagery, no intelligence reports, nothing. Just GPS coordinates pointing to the middle of nowhere and orders to bring Reddick home alive. The insertion went smooth. We fast-roped from the Blackhawk about 3 clicks out, the rotor wash whipping snow into our faces like frozen razors. The temperature was sitting at -37 Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze your breath in your lungs if you weren't careful. Corporal Paul Eklund, our demo specialist and the only one who spoke decent Russian, took point alongside Private Pedro Quinn, our youngest team member but hell of a sniper. Sergeant Rick Nielsen brought up the rear, carrying enough firepower to level a city block, including that modified flamethrower unit he'd requisitioned back at base. The prison complex materialized out of the blizzard like something from a nightmare. Concrete walls 20 feet high, razor wire gleaming with ice crystals, guard towers that looked like they'd been built during Stalin's era and never updated. The whole place had this oppressive atmosphere, like the cold itself was trying to warn us away. Jesus, this place gives me the creeps, Quinn whispered through the comm, his breath creating white puffs in the frigid air. Stay focused, I replied, studying the perimeter through my night vision scope. Eklund, talk to me about those sewage tunnels. Paul pulled out the crude facility blueprints we'd been given. Photocopies of photocopies that looked like they'd been drawn by hand decades ago. Entry point should be about 200 meters north of the main gate. Tunnel runs directly under the cell blocks. The infiltration through the sewage system was exactly as unpleasant as you'd expect. We crawled through frozen pipes barely wide enough for our gear, the smell of human waste and decay so thick it seemed to coat the inside of my mouth. Ice formations jutted from the tunnel walls like teeth, and more than once I heard the distant rumble of something moving in the pipes above us. We emerged in a maintenance area deep beneath the prison. The basement level was a maze of concrete corridors lit by flickering fluorescent lights that cast everything in sickly yellow shadows. Ancient Soviet-era heating pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation that had frozen into stalactites. Our first contact came sooner than expected. A guard rounded the corner, probably doing his rounds, and Quinn dropped him with a suppressed shot to the head before the man could raise an alarm. The body hit the floor with a wet thud that seemed to echo forever in those narrow hallways. 2 more coming, Eklund whispered, pointing down the corridor. We eliminated them silently. Nielsen got one with his knife, I took the other. Professional, clean, efficient. Nothing we hadn't done 100 times before. But as we dragged the bodies into a storage room, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The guards weren't wearing winter uniforms. They were dressed in what looked like hazmat protection gear underneath their regular clothes. Thick rubber gloves, sealed boots, and each one had a respirator mask hanging from their belt. What the hell are they protecting themselves from down here? Nielsen muttered, holding up one of the respirators. I didn't have an answer, but the unease in my gut was growing stronger with every step we took deeper into that place. The cell block was worse than anything I'd seen in my 15 years of military service. Rows of steel doors lined both sides of a corridor that stretched into darkness. The air was thick with the sounds of human misery, sobbing, muttering in various languages, the occasional scream that would echo off the walls and fade into nothing. But the worst part was the smell. Underneath the expected odors of unwashed bodies and poor sanitation was something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat left to spoil in the heat. It made my eyes water and my stomach clench. We found Reddick in the deepest part of the facility, in a cell that looked different from the others. Reinforced steel bars, multiple locks, chains hanging from the walls like something from a medieval dungeon. When our flashlight beams fell on him, I almost didn't recognize the man from his file photo. Agent Fred Reddick was suspended from the ceiling by heavy iron shackles around his wrists, ankles, and neck. His clothes were torn rags, his body was covered in what looked like burns or some kind of rash, and he was burning up with fever despite the freezing temperature. His breathing was labored, creating clouds of steam in the frigid air, and when he occasionally moved, the chains would rattle with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Holy Mother of God," Quinn breathed, staring at the scene. But it was the prisoner in the adjacent cell who really got our attention. An elderly Russian man, probably in his 70s, pressed against the bars separating his cell from Reddick. When he saw us approaching, his eyes went wide with what I can only describe as absolute terror. He started speaking rapidly in Russian, his voice hoarse and desperate. Eklund moved closer to translate, but the old man grabbed the bars with both hands and pulled himself as close as possible to us. "Atskaya gonchaya," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with such genuine fear that it made my blood run cold. Eklund's face went pale as he translated. "He's saying, Hellhound. He keeps repeating Hellhound and something about not human anymore." The old man continued babbling, pointing at Reddick and making what looked like the sign of the cross over and over again. His words came faster, more panicked, until finally he retreated to the back of his cell and curled up in the corner, rocking back and forth. "We need to move," I said, trying to shake off the growing dread. "Nielsen, break out the cutting torches." The chains holding Reddick were unlike anything I'd seen in standard prison facilities. Thick iron links that looked hand-forged, secured with locks that appeared to be custom-made. It took Nielsen nearly 20 minutes with the acetylene torch to cut through them, the sparks illuminating Reddick's unconscious face in brief, hellish flashes. As the final chain fell away, Reddick collapsed into Eklund's arms, his body limp and burning with fever. His skin had a strange pallor to it, almost grayish, and when I touched his forehead to check his temperature, it felt like touching a furnace. That's when everything went wrong. The cutting torch must have triggered some kind of alarm system, because suddenly, the entire prison erupted in chaos. Sirens wailed from speakers mounted in the walls. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and from somewhere above us came the sound of running feet and shouting voices. But worse than the alarms was the reaction of the other prisoners. Every single cell in that block came alive with screaming, banging, and what sounded like people throwing themselves against their doors with enough force to rattle the steel. The old Russian man who'd warned us about the Hellhound was screaming louder than anyone, his voice rising above the chaos in what sounded like prayers or incantations. "We've got company coming down those stairs," Quinn reported, his rifle trained on the corridor entrance. "Sounds like half the damn facility." I looked down at Reddick in Eklund's arms. Even unconscious, his breathing had changed. It was deeper now, more ragged, and I swear I could hear something else mixed in with each exhale, a sound that was almost like a growl. "Let's move," I ordered. "Nielsen, take point. Eklund, I'll help you with Reddick. Quinn, watch our six." As we started moving toward our planned exit route, the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop even further. The emergency lights cast everything in a crimson glow that made the ice on the walls look like frozen blood, and with each step we took, I could feel something fundamental shifting in the air around us. The last thing I remember thinking before we reached the stairwell was how Reddick's body seemed to be getting heavier with each step, as if something inside him was growing, expanding, preparing for whatever was about to happen next. The stairwell echoed with the thunderous sounds of Russian guards charging down from multiple levels above us. Their boots created a rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient prison, and I could hear them shouting coordinates and orders in rapid-fire Russian that Eklund was trying to translate on the fly. "They're sealing all exits," he reported breathlessly, supporting Reddick's limp form. "Something about containment protocols. Devon, they're not just trying to stop us. They're trying to keep something in." Nielsen had taken point with his modified flamethrower unit, the weapon's bulk making our movement through the narrow corridors slower than I would have liked. Every few seconds, Quinn would spin around to cover our retreat, his rifle scope sweeping for targets. But the approaching footsteps suggested we were vastly outnumbered. "How many you counting?" I asked him. "At least 15, maybe 20, Quinn replied, his young face grim with concentration. "They're moving in organized squads, not panicked guards. This is military precision." As we climbed toward the ground level, Reddick's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. What had started as unconsciousness and fever was evolving into something far more disturbing. His breathing became increasingly labored, and each exhale now carried a distinctly animal quality, a guttural rasping that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. But it was the physical changes that made my blood run cold. His skin, which had been pale and clammy when we first found him, was beginning to take on a mottled, grayish hue. Dark veins were becoming visible beneath the surface, creating a web-like pattern across his face and neck. His fingernails, I noticed with growing horror, had grown longer and appeared to be hardening into something resembling claws. "Eklund," I whispered urgently. "Is he running a fever, or is his body temperature actually dropping?" Paul pressed his hand against Reddick's forehead and immediately jerked it back. "Jesus Christ, Devin. He's burning up, but his skin feels wrong. Like touching a corpse that's been left in the sun." We reached the main level of the prison, just as the first wave of guards rounded the corner behind us. Quinn immediately opened fire, his suppressed rifle cutting down 2 of them before the rest dove for cover. The return fire was immediate and overwhelming, automatic weapons spraying bullets that chipped concrete from the walls around us and filled the air with deadly fragments. "This way!" Nielsen shouted, gesturing toward what looked like a service corridor. "We can't go back the way we came." As we dragged Reddick's increasingly heavy form toward the corridor, I noticed that the other prisoners had gone completely silent. The screaming and banging that had erupted when the alarms first sounded had stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie quiet that was somehow more unnerving than the chaos had been. The service corridor led to what appeared to be an old storage area filled with boxes of supplies and abandoned equipment. Nielsen was checking for alternate exits when Reddick suddenly convulsed in Eklund's arms, his back arching violently as a sound escaped his throat that was unlike anything I'd ever heard from a human being. It started as a low moan, but quickly escalated into something between a howl and a scream, filled with such raw agony that it made my teeth ache. His eyes snapped open for the first time since we'd found him, but they weren't the eyes I remembered from his intelligence file. The irises had taken on a yellowish cast, and the pupils were dilated so wide they looked almost black. "Put me down," he whispered, his voice hoarse and strangely distorted. "Please, put me down." Eklund gently lowered him to the floor, and that's when we saw the extent of what was happening to him. Reddick's clothes were soaked with sweat and something else, a dark, viscous fluid that seemed to be seeping through his pores. His muscles were visibly contracting and expanding beneath his skin, as if something was moving inside him, reshaping him from within. "What did they do to you?" I asked, kneeling beside him. Reddick's head turned toward me with a jerky, unnatural movement. When he spoke, his voice had dropped an octave and carried an undertone that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "The mission. In Kazakhstan." He gasped between ragged breaths. "Found something in the caves. Ancient. Not supposed to be there. They said it was just biological samples. But it was alive. It got into my blood through a scratch. Been fighting it for weeks, but the fever, the cold. It's winning." Quinn was standing watch at the corridor entrance when he suddenly hissed for our attention. "Guards are regrouping. Sounds like they're bringing heavy equipment." But I was focused on Reddick, whose physical transformation was accelerating at an alarming rate. His jaw was elongating, the bone structure of his face shifting in ways that defied human anatomy. Coarse, dark hair was beginning to sprout from his arms and the visible portions of his chest. "The Russians," he continued, his words becoming increasingly slurred as his mouth changed shape. "They knew what I was carrying. That's why they didn't just execute me. They were studying it, studying me, trying to figure out how to weaponize it." Nielsen had found what looked like another corridor leading deeper into the prison complex. But as he checked the route, Reddick's condition took a horrifying turn for the worse. His spine began to arch and twist, creating an unnatural curvature that made him appear to be folding in half. Something's happening, Eklund said, backing away as Reddick writhed on the floor. Something bad. The transformation that followed will haunt me for the rest of my life. Reddick's back suddenly split open with a wet, tearing sound, revealing not internal organs or bone, but something else entirely. A second set of limbs began to emerge from the opening, followed by what appeared to be a completely separate head and torso. It was as if there had been another creature growing inside him all along, using his body as a cocoon. The new entity that pulled itself free was a nightmarish fusion of human and wolf characteristics, but grotesquely oversized and covered in matted, blood-soaked fur. Its head was vaguely canine, but with human intelligence gleaming in its yellow eyes, and its mouth was filled with rows of teeth that looked more like surgical instruments than anything found in nature. The creature that had been Fred Reddick collapsed to the floor, now little more than an empty shell of skin and bone. But the thing that had emerged from his spine stood nearly 7 feet tall, its massive frame filling the storage room with a presence that felt almost supernaturally malevolent. "Run!" I whispered, but none of us moved. We were frozen by the sheer impossibility of what we were witnessing. The creature's head swiveled toward us with predatory focus, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged was a mixture of human speech and animal growling. "Thank you," it said in Reddick's voice, "for freeing me from that frozen hell." That's when the screaming started in the corridor behind us. Not the guards we'd been fighting, but something else. Something that suggested the creature standing before us wasn't the only one in this facility. Quinn was the first to break from our paralysis, raising his rifle and putting 3 rounds center mass into the creature's chest. The bullets struck with wet impacts, but instead of dropping, the thing merely looked down at the wounds with what appeared to be mild curiosity. "Conventional weapons won't work," Nielsen said grimly, hefting his flamethrower. "But let's see how it likes fire." The creature tilted its massive head, studying Nielsen's weapon with the calculating intelligence of something that understood exactly what it was facing. Then it smiled, revealing those surgical blade teeth, and began to advance. "You brought exactly what I was hoping for," it said in that distorted version of Reddick's voice. "I've been so very cold for so very long." Nielsen opened fire with the flamethrower, sending a stream of burning fuel across the storage room. The creature moved with impossible speed, leaping to one side and then bounding off the walls like some kind of oversized, predatory spider. The flames followed its movement, igniting boxes and equipment, but never quite making contact with their intended target. "It's too fast!" Nielsen shouted, adjusting his aim as the creature circled us with increasing speed. The thing that had been Reddick paused in its movement, crouching on its haunches in a way that was distinctly non-human. When it spoke again, its voice had lost all traces of Reddick's human inflection. "Your friend's memories are quite useful," it said. "I know about your extraction route, your backup plans, your equipment limitations. But most importantly, I know how you think, how you fight, how you die." It was then that we heard the sound that made my heart sink into my stomach. From somewhere in the prison above us came a chorus of howls. Not human, not quite animal, but something in between. The creature before us wasn't alone. "How many?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The creature's grin widened, showing even more of those terrible teeth. "Every prisoner in this facility has been infected for months. The Russians were so proud of their containment protocols, but they didn't understand what they were really dealing with. We've been waiting, growing stronger, preparing for the right moment." Quinn backed toward what looked like the storage room's rear exit, his rifle still trained on the creature. "Devin, we need to go. Now." But as he spoke, we heard the sound of heavy boots and panicked shouting echoing through the facility. The Russian guards were mobilizing, but from the terror in their voices, it was clear they had never encountered anything like what we were facing. The creature that had been Reddick stood up to its full height, its massive form casting shadows that seemed to move independently in the flickering light from Nielsen's flames. "The infection spreads through deep blood contact," it explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Scratches, bites, open wounds that reach the bloodstream. Your friend Reddick lasted longer than most. 3 weeks of fighting the change in those caves. But the cold, the stress, the isolation, it all helped the process along." Nielsen managed to land a glancing blow with the flamethrower, singing the creature's arm. It howled in pain and anger, a sound that was immediately answered by howls from throughout the facility. "You can't kill me easily," the creature snarled, its conversational tone replaced by pure predatory rage. "And once you're infected, you'll understand what I've become. What you'll become." That's when the lights went out, plunged by the creature's massive hand destroying the electrical panel. We were cast into absolute darkness, except for the glow from Nielsen's pilot light. In the darkness, we could hear the creature moving, its claws clicking against the concrete floor as it repositioned itself for an attack. "Night vision," I whispered to my team. But even as I switched on my own equipment, I realized that the creature's eyes were glowing with their own internal light, giving it a significant advantage in the darkness. The attack came from above. The creature had somehow climbed onto the ceiling and dropped down directly onto Quinn, who screamed as claws raked across his back, tearing through his tactical gear like paper. Nielsen immediately spun the flamethrower toward the sound, but in the confusion, he couldn't get a clear shot without hitting Quinn. I drew my sidearm and emptied the magazine in the direction of the creature, more to drive it back than with any hope of causing significant damage. The muzzle flashes illuminated brief, nightmarish glimpses of the fight, Quinn struggling beneath the creature's massive bulk, claws and teeth seeking vital organs. "Get it off him!" Eklund shouted, drawing his own weapon. Nielsen finally managed to line up a shot and sent a stream of burning fuel directly into the creature's face. It released Quinn with a shriek of pain and fury, stumbling backward and clawing at its burning features. Quinn rolled away, blood streaming from multiple wounds across his back and arms. "It's fast," he gasped. "Faster than anything human. And strong. Christ, it's strong." The creature, its face still smoldering from the flamethrower attack, turned toward Nielsen with focused hatred. When it spoke, its voice was barely recognizable as having once been human. "Fire," it hissed, "the one thing that still hurts. But you can't burn us all, and you can't escape. This facility is sealed. No one gets out until every human inside has been infected." From the corridors around us came the sound of approaching footsteps, not the organized march of guards, but the irregular loping gait of things that were no longer entirely bound by human limitations of movement. "How many prisoners were in this place?" I asked Eklund. "According to the intelligence briefing, 237. The creature that had been Reddick laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with animal growling. "I am alone, yes. But I am enough. The others in this prison are just ordinary prisoners. Humans who have no idea what they're sharing this place with. Only I carry the gift from those ancient caves." As if summoned by its words, we heard Russian guards shouting orders somewhere in the distance, followed by the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire. But the gunfire was sporadic, panicked, suggesting they were firing at shadows and echoes rather than organized targets. Nielsen raised his flamethrower, and I could see by the gauge that his fuel was running low. We had maybe 30 seconds of fire left, and this single creature was more dangerous than an entire squad of enemy soldiers. "The rear corridor," I ordered. "Quinn, can you move?" He nodded, blood loss making him pale but determination keeping him on his feet. "I can move. Question is, can we get past that thing and reach the exit before it catches us?" The answer came sooner than expected. The creature attacked with inhuman speed, leaping directly at Nielsen with its claws extended. Nielsen swept the flamethrower in a wide arc, creating a barrier of fire that forced the creature to change direction mid-leap, but the storage room was too small for extended maneuvering. "Go! Go! Go!" I shouted, pushing Quinn toward the rear corridor. As my team moved toward the exit, I found myself face to face with the creature that had been Fred Reddick. In the light from the flames, I could see that the burns on its face were already healing, the flesh regenerating at a speed that defied medical understanding. "This isn't over," it said in that distorted voice. "I know your scent now. I know your tactics. And I know exactly how long it takes for the infection to take hold once it enters your bloodstream. You won't make it out of Siberia before the change begins." I looked down at my hands and arms, checking for any scratches or cuts I might have missed. There, on my left forearm, was a thin line of blood where one of the creature's claws had found its mark during the fight. The scratch was small, barely noticeable, but as I stared at it, I could swear I felt something moving beneath the skin. We ran through the ancient corridors of that Siberian prison like men possessed, our boots echoing off stone walls that had witnessed decades of human suffering. Behind us, I could hear the creature that had been Fred Reddick pursuing us with a loping gait that seemed to cover ground faster than our desperate sprint. The scratch on my forearm burned like acid, and with each heartbeat, I could swear I felt something pulsing beneath the skin. Quinn was leaving a trail of blood from his wounds, but he kept pace with grim determination. Eklund stayed close behind him, ready to provide support if the younger soldier faltered, while Nielsen brought up the rear with his flamethrower, occasionally turning to send a burst of fire down the corridor behind us. "There!" Eklund pointed toward a heavy steel door marked with Cyrillic letters. "Emergency exit, I think." We reached the door to find it secured with a massive deadbolt lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Frost had formed around the edges, and when Nielsen tried to force it, the metal didn't budge. "Stand back," he said, preparing to use the last of his flamethrower fuel on the lock mechanism. That's when we heard it, a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. The creature had stopped pursuing us directly, and was instead moving through the parallel corridor system. I could hear its claws clicking against stone as it searched for another route to reach us, using what remained of Reddick's knowledge of the prison layout. "It's not following our path," Quinn said, pressing his ear to the wall. "It's using the heating tunnels. Those old Soviet prisons have maintenance corridors running between the main passages." The answer came with a thunderous crash as the creature burst through a weakened section of wall where decades of moisture had deteriorated the mortar. It emerged from the crumbling masonry like some primordial nightmare, its massive form covered in dust and debris, but otherwise unharmed by the impact. Nielsen immediately opened fire with the flamethrower, sending a stream of burning fuel directly at the creature's center mass. This time, he maintained the stream longer, and I watched as the flames engulfed the thing's torso and arms. It screamed, a sound that was part human agony and part animal rage. But instead of falling back, it charged directly through the fire. "The fuel lines!" Eklund shouted. "Aim for the fuel lines on its back!" I could see what he meant. The creature's transformation had left it with exposed tissue along its spine where it had emerged from Reddick's body. Dark veins pulsed beneath translucent skin, and I realized these might be vulnerable points. Nielsen adjusted his aim, sending a concentrated stream of fire at the creature's back. The flames struck the exposed area, and this time the creature's scream was pure agony. It stumbled, clawing at its own back, and for a moment I thought we might have found a way to kill it. But the moment passed quickly. The creature spun around, its yellow eyes fixed on Nielsen with murderous intent. When it spoke, its voice carried a tone of grudging respect mixed with fury. "Clever," it hissed. "You understand pain, at least. But you're only delaying the inevitable." It leaped at Nielsen with inhuman speed, covering the distance between them in a single bound. Nielsen tried to bring the flamethrower around, but the creature's claws slashed across his chest, sending him crashing into the wall with bone-crushing force. The flamethrower went flying, its fuel tank ruptured and spilling burning liquid across the floor. Nielsen slumped against the wall, blood pouring from massive wounds across his chest. His eyes found mine for a moment, and I could see he knew it was over. Take care of the others," he gasped, then went still. "Rick!" Quinn raised his rifle and put 3 rounds into the creature's back, aiming for the exposed areas Eklund had identified. The bullets struck home, dark fluid spraying from the wounds, but again the creature seemed more annoyed than seriously injured. It turned toward Quinn with that predatory intelligence gleaming in its eyes. "Your turn, young one." That's when I made a decision that probably saved Quinn's life, but may have doomed my own. I drew my combat knife and launched myself at the creature from behind, driving the blade deep into one of the exposed areas along its spine. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. It spun around, one massive claw catching me across the ribs and sending me sprawling across the floor. But the knife had done real damage. Dark, viscous fluid was pouring from the wound, and the creature's movements had become noticeably less coordinated. "The spine!" I shouted to my team as I rolled away from another swipe of its claws. "The exposed areas along its spine are the weak points." Eklund had found a piece of broken concrete pipe and was using it as a club, trying to get close enough to strike at the creature's back. Quinn repositioned himself to get a better angle for his rifle, while I searched desperately for something that could serve as a weapon. The creature seemed to realize it was being systematically targeted, and began moving with more caution, keeping its back against the wall and forcing us to approach from the front where its claws and teeth could do maximum damage. "You cannot win," it said, its voice becoming more distorted as the spinal fluid continued to leak from my knife wound. "Even if you kill this body, the infection is already spreading. Your friend here," it gestured at me with one bloody claw, "will begin to change within hours." I looked down at my forearm, where the scratch had now swollen and taken on a dark, mottled appearance. The skin around the wound felt hot to the touch, and I could see dark lines spreading outward like infection tracking up my arm. "How long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The creature smiled with those surgical blade teeth. 12 to 18 hours for the initial symptoms. Fever, disorientation, muscle spasms. Then the real fun begins. Your bones will start to reshape themselves, your muscles will tear and regrow, and your mind, well, let's just say you'll have new perspectives on hunger and violence. I had managed to soak a piece of Nielsen's torn shirt in the spilled flamethrower fuel. Using a lighter from my kit, I created a makeshift torch and began advancing on the creature from its blind side. "Paul," I called out to Eklund, my voice steady despite the terror. "Keep it talking. Keep it focused on you." I understood his plan immediately. What was in those caves in Kazakhstan? What did Reddick really find? The creature's eyes took on a distant look, as if accessing memories that didn't entirely belong to it. Ancient things. Older than your species. Older than most of the life on this planet. They came from somewhere else. Somewhere cold and dark. And they've been waiting in those caves for the right host to carry them back into the world. "Aliens?" Quinn asked, maintaining his rifle sight on the creature's exposed spine. "Not exactly," the creature replied. "Think of them as biological tools. Weapons designed to infiltrate and transform existing life forms into something more suitable for their creator's purposes. Your friend Reddick was an excellent test subject. Strong, intelligent, with enough survival instinct to last through the initial transformation." I was now directly behind the creature, my improvised torch ready to strike. But as I raised it, the creature's head swiveled around with an owl-like rotation that should have been impossible for any vertebrate. "Did you really think I couldn't smell the burning fuel?" it asked with amusement. Before I could react, the creature's arm extended backward with serpentine flexibility, catching me around the throat and lifting me off the ground. I struggled, trying to bring the torch into contact with the creature's exposed spine, but its grip was cutting off my air supply. That's when Eklund made his move. While the creature was distracted with me, he charged forward with the concrete pipe raised overhead and brought it down with all his strength on the largest of the exposed areas along the creature's back. The impact was devastating. The pipe shattered against the creature's spine, but not before driving bone fragments deep into the vital areas beneath. The creature released me and let out a scream that shattered light fixtures and sent chunks of concrete falling from the ceiling. Dark fluid poured from the wound like oil from a ruptured engine, and the creature's legs buckled. It fell to its knees, clawing at its own back in a futile attempt to reach the damage. "Now!" I shouted, gasping for air. "While it's down!" Quinn put his remaining ammunition into the creature's spine while Eklund and I found more chunks of concrete to use as weapons. We hammered at the exposed areas relentlessly, each impact causing more of that dark fluid to spill onto the floor. But even as we attacked, the creature was fighting back. One of its claws caught Eklund across the chest, sending him sprawling. I heard him hit the wall with a sickening crack, and when I looked over, blood was spreading across his uniform. "Paul!" I started toward him, but Quinn grabbed my arm. "He's gone, Devin," Quinn said grimly. "We finish this now, or we all die here." "The brainstem," Nielsen gasped. "I think I got the brainstem." The creature that had been Fred Reddick collapsed forward, its massive body striking the floor with a wet thud. Dark fluid spread out from beneath it in an expanding pool, and the yellow glow faded from its eyes. "Is he?" Quinn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I approached Reddick's body cautiously, checking for vital signs. "He's dead. Has been for a while. I think. Whatever that thing was, it was just using his body as a host." Quinn was leaning against the wall, exhaustion and grief weighing heavily on his young face. What the hell was it really? I thought about what the creature had told us about caves in Kazakhstan, about biological weapons older than human civilization. But without more evidence, it was just the ravings of something that had once been human. I don't know, I admitted. Some kind of parasite, maybe. Something that takes over its host and transforms them. We made our way through the prison corridors, past cells full of terrified Russian prisoners who pressed themselves against the bars as we passed. The guards we encountered were too shaken by their own encounters with the creature to put up much resistance. They seemed more interested in staying alive than stopping 2 American soldiers from leaving. I carried Reddick's body while Quinn covered our retreat. Whatever had infected him was dead now, but we needed to bring him home. His family deserved to know what happened, even if the full truth would never be declassified. The extraction helicopter found us at the designated coordinates 4 hours later. As we lifted off from the frozen Siberian landscape, I watched the prison facility disappear into the blizzard below. Somewhere in that complex, Russian authorities would find evidence of something that shouldn't exist, and they'd have their own questions to answer. During the flight, Quinn and I discussed what we'd tell our debriefers. Agent Fred Reddick had been infected with some kind of biological weapon during a previous mission. The transformation had been irreversible, and we'd been forced to put him down to protect ourselves and prevent the spread of whatever had taken him over. 3 weeks later, I sat in a military debriefing room, going over my report for the 5th time with intelligence officers whose names I wasn't allowed to know. They asked the same questions over and over. What exactly had infected Reddick? Where might the biological agent have originated? Were there any remaining samples or evidence? I told them what I could without venturing into speculation about ancient parasites or caves in Kazakhstan. Agent Reddick had been infected with an unknown biological agent during a previous operation. The infection had caused severe physical and mental deterioration, ultimately requiring lethal force to prevent spread to the extraction team. Quinn, sitting beside me, corroborated my account. He'd seen the same things I had, fought the same battle, lost the same friends. But like me, he kept the more unbelievable details to himself. Who would believe us anyway? The official report classified our mission as a partial success. Agent Fred Reddick was listed as KIA, cause of death attributed to complications from biological warfare exposure. Nielsen and Eklund were posthumously awarded commendations for heroism under fire. The Siberian facility was noted as containing experimental biological research and recommended for continued surveillance, but the questions never stopped. In the weeks that followed, I found myself repeatedly called back for additional debriefings, medical examinations, and psychological evaluations. Someone higher up the chain of command was very interested in the details of what we'd encountered, even if they couldn't officially acknowledge what those details really meant. The scratch on my arm healed completely, leaving only a thin scar as evidence of my encounter with the creature. Medical tests showed no signs of infection or biological contamination. Whatever had been in that thing's claws, it had either been neutralized by its death or had never truly been transmissible through superficial wounds. 6 months later, I received new orders. Assignment to a joint intelligence task force focused on emerging biological threats. The posting would take me to various locations around the world, investigating reports of unusual diseases, unexplained deaths, and what the file euphemistically termed anomalous biological phenomena. I accepted the assignment, knowing that somewhere out there, in caves or laboratories or places I couldn't yet imagine, there might be more things like what had taken Fred Reddick. The creature had spoken of others, of biological tools waiting for the right host. My name is Staff Sergeant Devin Redford, and this is my complete report on the Siberian extraction mission. Agent Fred Reddick died serving his country, killed by something that should never have existed. Nielsen and Eklund died as heroes, fighting an enemy that defied every rule of conventional warfare. Quinn and I survived, but we're different now. We've seen what's possible when the laws of biology are twisted by intelligence and malevolence. We know that there are threats out there that our training never prepared us for, and we're the only ones qualified to find them before they find someone else.